And the neighbors saw, so they wanted some too. So they came over. That was one part of the artifact group. That the other part was we knew there was one piece of the metal, you know, that metal that is memory metal, because I had interviewed Remy at his home, and he showed me the Prince Albert can, and that's tobacco for you people that know from way back when, that he had put this one piece he found of the memory metal in there, and they ended up fixing a windmill with it. So we even thought we could go find the windmill, dig up the... Then we come to find out she's playing with whole strips of this stuff. Jose did not know that you had whole strips of this stuff in the house, and we'll let her tell you that. This is why they didn't know Jose that had no idea what Sabrina experienced, because Jose had left New Mexico when he was about 13 or 14, and Sabrina was there. Didn't know the other part of the story, so we're getting new information. We're dealing with what she called spider web, and Jacques, you can talk about this. I don't know what it was, but it was all over, and we have movies of Jose showing us where it was when the crash happened, because it came out of the craft and was spread all over the place. But when you see it all lit up like that, they just wanted to put it in a 10-pound bag and put it, you said, in the bunkhouse. And the other stuff, which I'm guessing Jose's father, with whom you lived, Faustino, went out there with the horse and found that other stuff later. So that part of the artifact. Since the recovery, and Jacques, you can add something to this, took almost 8 days. The kids are watching this. They were told not to go there. They're watching it. And they want a, what do you call it, a souvenir that they called a tesoro, or it's called a souvenir, but it's like keeping a souvenir. And then you can add, what did they do?
So I think we should let Sabrina describe how she came to a scene and what it was like, because you came in after the two prime witnesses, had gone on to their lives a few years later, and so you're adding another perspective to the entire story. We've reconstructed the story from the time the object arrived, and it was, we know that Jose, your uncle's father, went inside the object on the third day with a New Mexico patrolman, New Mexico investigator,
Okay.
and then they saw whatever was inside, and then Jose later had a chance to go inside himself and retrieve something. After that, you're the witness who comes later, and you saw that from a different perspective. So what brought you to that area?
Well, after the crash, okay, all right. Okay, after the crash, a lot of this stuff, one of the panels came out of the craft. It was one panel, but all the inside was made exactly very clean line. It was just very clean in there. There was no seats.
Talk about the part that you're involved in, because you didn't see the inside of the craft.
Okay.
What did you see?
Okay, what I saw was we called it, instead of the spider webs, we called it angel hair. And we had like a big gunny sack full of it, because at that time they used to give people potatoes in gunny sacks, and so, and we had a big bag full of that stuff, and that's what we didn't have no really use for it, so we decorated the Christmas trees with it because it was very beautiful. It looked like hair, like regular woman's hair or anybody's hair, but the strange thing about it was it would give you shocks when you touch it. It wasn't safe to really touch it for some reason. I don't know why it would just do that. And it was like a pinkish blonde color with a little purple in it, and it would actually glow at night. And that's why we thought, okay, well, this will look good to put on a Christmas tree. It'll glow at night, you know what I mean? And so that's how that happened. And as far as the medals that it was picked up, even after my uncle left the house, it was just me and my grandparents alone there. My uncle went to join the army or something, and he left San Antonio, and it was just us alone there. We still had that even after 8 years later. When I came along, I came back there in '53, and that was 8 years later. We still had some of that stuff in the house, and I played with it quite a few times, and I didn't think it was anything that fantastic. I was so used to it, I didn't think it was a big deal.
What about the metal? The you would crunch up? You said.
Oh yeah, there was a metal. It looked like, if I could describe it, like foil paper that you would use to put on your turkey for Christmas or things like that. And they were like 3 strips. They were like as long as a school ruler, an inch wide, and they were just in strips, long like that. And me and my grandfather used to sit on the kitchen table and play with them, and we literally just play with them till we got tired, and then he put it away.
How did you play with them?
Well, we folded it up, we balled it up, whatever way we did it, it just came right back into its original shape. It wouldn't go in a fast fashion, it'd go very slow. It just opened up very slow and go all the way until it got flat again. I don't care how many times we folded, if we balled it up, it just would come right back to its original state and get flat again. And that's what I thought was funny to me then, because you got to remember I was 9 years old. And the metal that was part of the craft there, pieces of it that broke off, they were sort of unusual. They wouldn't burn. And if you ever lived in San Antonio and New Mexico there, it gets very hot over there. If you even touch a hood of a car, you'll burn your hand. It's so hot, But this particular metal, for some reason, it wouldn't get hot, And I was a kid then, and I said, oh, look, it's so cool. I even put it on my face. It's so cool. Well, an adult wouldn't do that, And anyway, that's how I found that out. And my uncle had spoken to me once, told me that he tried to actually put a blowtorch to it and try to burn it, but it wouldn't burn.
One more thing. When you were a little girl, you were told not to go to a certain area, and you went anyway.
Yeah, I did. I was one of those kind of kids. I did. I went over there. I wasn't supposed to go over there, and they didn't know I went over there, but I did. I snuck over there at least 2 times.
So describe the terrain, because they don't know what it looks like.
Well, actually, the terrain is very rough. If you was to go over there, it's best to go on horseback, or if you have like a 4-wheel, you go the real long way, but it's like 6 miles from the house if you go through the arroyos, and like I said, it's very rough terrain. And
what did you see?
I went over there, I snuck over there, I passed the cows, because they had like this, we had a bunch of cows on the property, and after a couple of days after they come in and graze, then they go back out to this little area where they kind of huddle up together for the night. And I even passed them up looking for this area. And I passed them up. I went around this mountain, and that's when I saw it. It was like as big as a football field. It was jet black, burnt up. And it was actually bigger than me. I looked at it and I said, oh my goodness, at that point I got scared, because you got to remember I was 9 years old. I said, this thing looked like it's gonna swallow me up, And
because what? It was deep. It was like a chasm or a hole.
Yeah, there was a indentation on the ground where something had occurred, where we knew there was an accident there with the craft that crashed there. There was an indentation on the ground, and but there was everything was burnt up. All the shrubbery that used to be there used to be trees there, a lot of mesquite, and this kind of special plant we called it yerba buena. and it would just grow natural there in that part of the terrain, and it just burnt up everything. It was just, everything was burnt up. Even the tree, there was a tree there that burned so fast that it left the skeleton of the tree there. It burned just to smithereens. It didn't even have time. It just, the way it died, the tree is the way it left it. You know, it just black and, you know. So. And I just got scared, and I turned around and came back to the house before they noticed I was gone, because at that point, I really realized I was alone. At that point, there was no cell phones. There was no Amber Alert. there wasn't no 911.
And she did something she wasn't supposed to do.
I truly was alone, and believe me, I think I didn't even care if there were snakes out there. I ran so fast. and went home, so, you know, I didn't tell them that I went out there, because, you know, it would be a problem. So.
What was the feeling of the fibers when you were handling them, the fibers or the spider web?
Well,
what did it feel like?
My uncle called it a spider web, but we gave it a name, angel hair. And we really don't know what that material was. We just named it angel hair. We don't know, because we don't know where it came, you know, that it came not from this earth. But it was very silky. It was very shiny, and it glowed in the dark. It was like a blonde piece of hair, and it had purple and pink in it, like a rainbow color. And I liked it because I'm a girl, and I thought, oh, I'll just comb this hair, you know, like you have dolls, you know, they like to comb the hair and all this stuff, you know. But this particular hair, it would give you shocks in your hands when you handled it. And even if you left a little strand left behind, it would still shock you, and it was not a comfortable feeling, and that's what would get me away, not to play with it that much. Like I played with the metal more than I played with that.
What was your uncle's reaction to that material? I mean, was he still collecting some of it from the crash site? Or
well, actually, after my uncle left and went back to California, I think he got involved with the service of some kind, and my grandfather went over there and collected some of that stuff, I think, on his own before the Army came in there and took everything out of there. Because once the Army found out that that stuff had occurred there, they cleaned up within a week. It was over, like nothing ever happened. They cleaned up real nice, and they told us, don't ever speak about it. Don't talk to nobody about it. They were very clear. And they made sure they came to our house almost every month to ask us questions. Did we see anything? Did we find anything? Or they would kept coming to our house like it was a regular visit. And my grandfather, he was kind of old and all. He was suffering with stomach cancer at the time, and he would just say no. And sometimes they would come, and they would only stay like maybe 5 minutes and then leave.
And you said they came in the back door.
Yeah, they never came through the front door. They
never
came through the back
front
door.
They came in through the back door, and you said your grandfather said to come to the front door. And,
yeah. Well, at the time when they were asking my grandfather, could they come through his property to remove that craft from there, they didn't want to come through the front gate, which we had a long driveway. And my grandfather told him, why don't you come through the driveway, you know, you got a long driveway right there, why don't you come there like everybody else? But they made their own special road from the mountains over and under the, the freeway, and came through the back way to carry that thing out so nobody would see it or find out and they came and did it at nighttime, and in New Mexico, they don't have street lights over there. You know, like we have in the city, we have lights, you know, and don't matter what time of night, there's a light out. Over there, there's no lights. You can't see your hand in front of you when it's dark out there. But they came there when they knew that the town there, San Antonio, was asleep. And they came and carried that thing out of there about maybe 1, 2 o'clock in the morning.
So we got to remember a couple of things, because we've been there so often. We have been there a lot of times. Was they asked the Padilla family, could they cut the cattle guard because they were going to take out a weather balloon? And I remember your grandfather said, well, you know, the weather, if it's weather balloon, you know, because they, Jose and your grandfather had picked up weather balloons and they returned them to the Army. So they knew it was no weather balloon. They said, here's your weather balloons. And they said, no, this is a bigger one, 30 feet wide, and can we cut the gate? Well, the gate was cut. You can see the difference in the fence. And they built a special road just to take this vehicle out. The road is there today, built by the Army, but you could also see the old road, the one that you went over. Yeah. So the idea that you had to be quiet because Faustino and Jose knew it was no weather balloon, you had to be quiet and respectful, was just part of this deal. The other thing was that as Jacques has said, we know the name of the sheriff that the little boys had gone with the father. The father and Sheriff Apodaca went inside the craft the next day when there was no Army. They had gone inside for almost 45 minutes. So this case is unusual because they went inside the craft. Then it took the other 7 days to put it, and you can talk about the flatbed and how they did that, you know, to get it out of there.
So Sabrina brings information that, to me, was very important with respect to what Colonel Corso described to you, that you put in your book about Colonel Corso, about the fibers. I had the privilege of having a couple of private meetings with Colonel Corso, and I told him, look, I mean, obviously, you know, I believe what you describe, but, you know, fiber optics were known before the war. I mean, fiber optics don't come from UFOs, okay? There were fiber optics before. The French resistance used fiber optics for communication during World War II. And, you know, in learning physics, I learned about fiber optics and where they came from. So I said, this is curious that, you know, you described, and he described in your book, having bundles of fiber optics that were turned over to him by General Trudeau with the responsibility to take it to different labs, different American labs, to study it without telling them where that material came from. Well, he said, well, all I can tell you, you know, I'm not a physicist, all I can tell you is that there were these fibers and they were glowing. And I had never really understood that part of it until you told me about what you had seen. And what you had seen wasn't fibers, right? It was not fibers and it was not fiber web. Those are misnomers that we use to describe it. But it was, what was it, like a bundle?
Well, it was like a lock of hair about this long. You know, I'm just trying to make, it was about this long. It wasn't attached to anything. It was just a lock of hair, and you know, I played with it, so that...
Was it a lock of hair that was attached to other locks of hair?
No, it wasn't attached. It was just a bunch of hair together, like it was cut that way or it came that way.
And it was all colors?
Yeah, and it was like that, yes.
So this is a way you have to do research. You know, every case brings some results, some contradictions, or adds some new data, some new ways of looking at the research. And I think this is very important in terms of you know, what Colonel Corso was describing. All of a sudden, we understand, you know, how that description happened and why it's right. We also understand some of the other things that you described, like the shape memory medal. And this 1945 case actually reinforces Roswell. As you may know, there were many questions about Roswell. People still argue whether there was one crash or two. or one object that broke into and crashed into places. There was no witness to see it and so on. Here, the situation is completely different. We have two very sharp young kids who are watching the object arrive on their land. They are going to be there the next 10 days. There is one day, the next day, the father needs them in town to do some gardening, and so they are not on site. When they come back, the day number 3, and I've gone through all the transcripts and reconstructed in the book everything for those 10 days. Who was there, what they were doing, what was the temperature, what was the weather. We've gone back to those records and reconstructed all of that very, very carefully. They are going to be watching the entire recovery of this object. The object is not a disk. They describe it as an avocado, the size of 2 trucks. If you take 2 Ford F-150, one on top of the other. So it was very large. The interior volume was very large. There was a flat floor that Jose described to us. There was the propulsion system, if there is a propulsion system, would be underneath the floor. There was no opening. There were no propellers. There were no reactors. There were no openings at all. The object must have been extraordinarily strong to hit the tower, not be destroyed. One panel was ejected, and that's where the spider web came from. Was all over the landscape, and that's where they picked it up. And again, the witnesses could not relate to anything in the literature. Remember, Kenneth Arnold is 2 years in the future, 1947. There is no American Air Force. And there are airplanes and pilots, but they belong to the Army. It's the Army Air Force. They have Army uniforms. When the officers come to the house, they speak Spanish. Of course they speak Spanish. I mean, this is New Mexico, okay? They could speak English or Spanish, but these are so the local population, and we've spent a lot of time reconstructing all of that, sort of putting ourselves back into that time, and that's why, you're so valuable to us, as a witness in